Oh yeah, Blocktrades. So yeah, there was this question I had, and I've been working on compiling the whole of 2024 onboarding data and putting it on a front end, and I'm really close. I'm going to be done with it soon. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, considering that you have seen so many projects doing their onboarding, and you're seeing those 15,000 accounts, 20,000 accounts, and then you're seeing the highs staked in them, and et cetera, et cetera. Do you feel good about our onboarding system? People coming in from outside and creating accounts, or the people who are creating accounts, whether the quality of the people who are being onboarding.
I feel like
Is that something you're happy about?
No, I think it could be a lot better. I mean, we have a bunch of systems. They have a bunch of them have been exposed to have problems when been tested. There's been a lot of reliability problems. There's problems in different payment for purchasing accounts. There's problems with the ones that give away free accounts because they often get gamed and they don't have very effective measures for preventing that. So, I mean, there's work going on to improve some of those things, but I don't think we can say that there's been a fairly obvious problems in the various onboarding sites, and I don't know that I need to go into details here, but I covered at least a little bit of the problems there, and I think most people are aware of them. So yeah, it's certainly an open area for improvement, and I come back to all the time, the way the system's built, I just don't think the ones that are giving away accounts free are going to work out well. I think a small charge is the way to go, and just leave it as it's a premium to get the benefit of joining a club sort of thing. It's not a big premium, it's a small premium.
Is that the only change you would recommend? You think that itself would fix
one of the most important ones, because then you can make everything else easier. You don't have any other hurdles. You can get rid of all the other hurdles that are being put in place to avoid that problem of taking a payment. So that opens it up to then you just need a system that's not too difficult to fill in the form, right? Make the payment. That's it. That is the big challenge. Of course, then you got to then direct people to that, so you got to funnel people to that place. The problem is when you had all the free systems, they would often attract attention away from some of the ones that were paying that were actually better systems. And so people might get a headache. They go to a free one and they're supposed to get a free account, and then for one reason or another, they don't get an account. They don't get an account at all. They have to try it 3 or 4 times, and it just frustrates the crap out of
them. Yes, that has happened.
I think Lord Butterfly did a bunch of experiments at one point where he was just going through trying each one, trying to find one that worked well for him so that he could point people to. And yeah, he could tell you all about his experiences with it. And I didn't do
he has very vocally.
Yeah.
He's been very, very, he has very, eloquently vocalized, very creatively vocalized how difficult it has been for him.
So we can just keep playing this game of not mentioning the name, but I didn't want to throw you out there under the bus during the show. But I, as a person who doesn't have a horse in the game, I don't know. I don't use that proposal's tools. I'm not invested in them even remotely, but from an external perspective, I see that they are very active, and I see that they're really pushing what seems like they're pushing to do things and make things happen on the chain. So I am curious, like why them? Because there's so many proposals on there that I can't quite figure out like where the benefit is, and there probably is in code that I'm unaware of. But are you willing to kind of explain a little bit what the holdup or what the issue is?
Just to ask the other question, somebody asked about speaking directly to Mike. Actually, my mic is attached to my headphone, but the problem was I'd pulled it up because I was getting back to work, so I just pulled it back down. So hopefully you can hear me better now. Yeah, so basically you were asking me why that particular proposal, I guess. So there's a bunch of reasons, and I'm not going to get into all of them now. but I'll at least address a few. One of the fundamental ones was it's a software project, and it was not at the time, at least, a open source software project. And I'm very much opposed nowadays to funding closed source software projects through the DHF, primarily because what happens is if especially unless it's a large group of people, maybe if it's like a huge number of people, so it's going to be able to survive. But when it's just a few people involved in a closed source project, if those people go away or die or whatever, then all that work is lost. So it's a very risky proposition, in my opinion, to fund open closed source projects with the DHF. So I'm generally opposed to it, and usually the first thing I'll argue against doing for any proposal. I've opposed several closed source projects. Sometimes they've been funded, and sometimes again I don't make too big a deal out of it. Apparently people want them, so that's fun, at some point. But this one in particular, I was just like, it was going to be closed source time, so I was very much opposed to that. Another amount was the sheer amount of the money, and my concerns about the accountability. There was the track record of the previous project, which had made a bunch of big promises and then not delivered. And there was even, from my point of view, it looked like a bunch of those things, they were sort of being, I felt like the statistics were being manipulated to make it appear like there was more success than there was. And that I find particularly bothers me. That form of what I'll see, to me, felt like deception. So when you're talking about accountability, one of the first things you want to do in any business is you want to be sure you can trust the work. And I had severe doubts about that based on some of the conversations I had seen on chain and about some of the topics. So those some of the points. There were also, I had some deep regulatory concerns as well, because the proposal involved actual operating of essentially exchange operations. And while the current administration is certainly much more friendly to that at the moment, there's no guarantee that will continue at any time. And I think that all the reasons to suspect that at some point those concerns are going to come back around again. So that part of the proposal also had me deeply concerned. And then finally, it was just proposing to do a lot in a very short amount of time without. I think you have to be careful when you're doing new things, especially things that are potentially controversial. And I think there's potentially controversial aspects in terms of the economics of that proposal that might not be obvious at first glance, but could show up, and if done in a big way, could blow up in our faces and actually have a negative impact. So that's very general. I could get more into details on that if you have an interest in a particular point.
No, that was the general thing. I appreciate you kind of sticking your neck out there and explaining that. I did want to ask it in the
I mean, I
show,
don't
but
mind, and honestly, giving my opinions on these subjects. It's not like I don't have any problem saying it was the Leo proposal. This is not a problem I have.
It's
yeah, I
out.
mean,
Yes, the name is out.
yeah, we're skating around it, and like I say, I haven't I'm not involved with their project, but yeah, we sit at the poker table with Cal. Like I've had some really nice conversations with him. He seems excitable, like in like he's just always putting
Passionate.
out
He feels
positive
passionate.
stuff about passionate, right? And he like he really seems like he cares about the chain. So like I guess when there's like a vacancy of that in a lot of the other funded projects, and almost like what feels like a
So
black hole of
let me
information,
let
then
me let me
yeah,
get back to that point. So passion has its place, but when I'm evaluate things, I don't usually spend a lot of passion in my evaluation. I may see the passion from someone else, and I can see it may have an impact as a marketing method, right? But it's not the way I evaluate things. I think passion is the wrong way to evaluate things in terms of examining their strengths and weaknesses. So when someone's passionate, it doesn't necessarily have a lot of impact on me. It's because sometimes I think their passion may blind them. So it's necessarily not necessarily a positive or a negative for me. It's a weighted thing. It has goods and bads to it. You see what I'm saying?
absolutely. And I fall victim to that myself. I'm pretty passionate, and I'm constantly blind.
Yeah,
Everyone loves an honest man.
it's not that I don't have passion. Don't get me wrong, but I do try to keep it under control to a large extent because it can affect me too.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, passion is a great motivator, and that's the positive side of it.
So, Blockhead, this is a question I don't think is on many people's mind, and it's something that I've been wondering about for a long time now. The future generation that's coming. We're talking about the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas, the kids who are on TikTok, the kids who are playing Roblox. Do you feel that the Hive's future continues with them? And if it does, do you feel that this is a time that, at this early in their ages or anything, that Hive is something that could be proposed to them in terms of, posting or, creating a memoir or creating a blog or, you know,
Well,
because,
I think there's fairly obvious in
yeah,
terms of just the demographics that cryptocurrency is most popular among young people. And for lots of I guess somewhat obvious reasons. So yeah, I think the target market should typically, in fact, be young people. I wouldn't be targeting retirees for Hive. Yeah, and probably the younger the better for the large extent, up to the levels of regulatory rules and who you can market to. So yeah,
I'm
sure.
pretty sure that most of the people here are retirees.
Well, maybe on this show, but because they have the time to talk. But my point is that doesn't necessarily represent the average user on Hive either.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true.
And if you look at cryptocurrency in general, clearly it's younger people.
Right, but the younger people are getting into crypto for the wrong reasons. They're getting into Solana meme coins. They're getting into, I don't know, they're getting into, oh, I'm going to do a one shot, I'm going to get rich quick. And that's how
Well, that
they
drives
are at
most
that age. They're in the
cryptocurrency.
get rich quick.
That drives most cryptocurrency is the get rich quick
Yes.
plan.
Right. So
It's
if we want
unfortunate,
them
true.
to look at Hive, right, we obviously can't offer them the same carrot that they're getting from there. So what do you think is the Hive? Because if you talk to them about Hive's tech, right, they're going to yawn. I mean, each time I talk at home about tech, my wife yawns, right? My kid yawns. This is normal. So what do you think is going to be the major motivator for them? Is there something right now in Hive, or do you think that something has to be made for that?
I mean, it's a question I can't easily answer. I certainly think adding more to Hive will make it more attractive. And yeah, maybe it's not there yet to make it really big attractive. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe it's possible right now to make Hives just by some proper marketing effort more popular. With the sufficient money, that's probably true. But given the constraints that we have, I doubt that just with Hive as it is, it's suddenly just going to go huge. That's why I think things like the DHF are important. I think more technology has to be developed. You gotta bring in things that really attract attention, something that somebody really wants. And when you provide that to them, then you'll naturally get the kind of word of mouth type attraction that you really want in the end to grow big nowadays.
Organic.
Traditional marketing is only gets you so far anymore. You've really got to have, or you've got to have like, it's got to be some kind of internet-based marketing at the end of the day nowadays to get attention. All the traditional methods are falling away, and because to get the sheer number of people, you really just need to reach a very broad category, and even traditional broadcast marketing no longer works.
Can I just say that Hive is for grandmothers? Hive is for grandmothers. Because on Spend HBD, if you go on to spendhbd.social.gifts, you'll see how many grandmothers are using Hive to scan to spend, taking 2 photos, writing a short review, and getting a 20% discount. It's for grandmothers. 100%.
Well, and the thing is there, yeah. So the point is, it gets back to what I said at the beginning. You got to target to your market. So you find something that's attractive to that market, and you offer them to them. And yeah, you can get grandmothers at that point. Yeah, you just got to find the thing that they want and provide that to them, and suddenly, yeah, you have a new demographic that you didn't have before.
Yeah,
When I say in terms of cryptocurrency in general, the attraction market is young people, and it is people looking to get rich quick. I'm not saying that's the long term. I know, but I'm not even saying that's the. I mean, I kind of think that's not where we should be targeting. I don't think it's a great idea to be selling get rich quick schemes to people. I kind of feel it's slightly immoral, and it's just to me, it's not a great thing to do. So I've never pushed for that. It might work, but I just don't think it's a great idea. What I think is good is if you find something that people really find useful and not just making money, but find valuable in their lives. If we can offer that, that's where we should go, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was just kind of responding to the comment because he was saying that Hive ain't for grandmothers, but there's plenty of grandmothers on Hive and they're using it because it's easy. That's the reason. It's the easiest blockchain out there, and it's not a demographic that we've targeted, but grandmothers and also women really like to spend HBD because they get discounts for it. And so when people say there's no women in blockchain or we've got to do more,
I think we saw early on that Hive attracted more women than most blockchains.
Yeah,
that became very obvious early on.
Hive is the women's blockchain for sure.
So what's our next step then? Subliminal messaging? Make Cocomelon for kids, Hive version, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking we should skip the subliminal messaging.
Blocktrades, what's your thoughts on alternative distribution mechanisms in terms of, for example, people are recording this after show here, and part of the reason is because they're going to get shorts from it that we can then put into places like Hive Echo, the Hive Echo initiative. There's a drive there where you can put your
you're talking about like guerrilla marketing, right? I'm actually a huge believer in guerrilla marketing, and I think it's still largely untapped compared to what it could be in for Hive.
Hive could be a massive mechanism for this, and ultimately you basically share it on your other Web2 platforms, and then you take a photo of it, put it under comments, and you get votes.
Yeah, back in my day, we called this guerrilla marketing. I don't know if they still do it or not, but the idea was just like guerrilla warfare. You don't have a big army, but what you do is you've got a bunch of passionate people, and so you just use them. They do the cheap things. They do all the cheap things. And they spread their message through all the cheap ways out there. And it's just a sort of combined effort of everybody. So we have a bunch of people that could do this, and sometimes just motivating them. And Hive is still more successful with this kind of motivation than other chains. We can see this when we do voting initiatives where we need to get a bunch of people to vote for cryptocurrency. We always do it incredibly well in that area. But if you just want to, if you can motivate more people in Hive to spread the message about Hive at a grassroots level, guerrilla warfare level, whatever you want to call it, just in every venue they can find, push, spread the message of Hive. I think that's still the best way that Hive will ever make it to success, besides the technology, improving the technology itself.
Do you feel like we could try to tempt some of the whales that vote for the return proposals back to voting for this type of guerrilla marketing? Because there's mechanisms on Hive now to reward this. And I feel like it's incredibly valuable rewards distribution.
I think if you get something out there, plenty of the voters in general will vote for it. So you're talking about voting for posts that do stuff. People would send me messages to vote for this because it pushes Hive in some way, and I pretty much always vote for them. And I think most of the whales would, sure. So I think just using, and this isn't DHF money, this is just the rewards money, which is a lot. There's way more than the DHF as it turns out there. So. We could actually spend a lot more money on marketing through that than we could through the DHF.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys are familiar with the folk singer Daniel Johnston, but speaking of guerrilla marketing, one thing he used to do back in like the 70s or 80s, he was working at McDonald's and he would put his mixtape in everyone's Happy Meals, and that's how he originally got his music out. Is you would find some really weird music in your children's Happy Meals.
Yeah, that's a classic form of guerrilla marketing, as it turns out.
That's also borderline illegal, from what I understand.
Lots of guerrilla marketing techniques. Lots of guerrilla marketing techniques are borderline illegal. Doesn't mean
so earlier.
Not all of them are, though.
We should stick to the ones that are not.
earlier when you were talking with the Hive in talking about like physical locations and property and these things. This is a subject that came up maybe like 5 weeks ago, and I'd just be curious
Just like the hotel idea.
like yeah, just like the DHF as like a like not using the DHF. Is there some other mechanism that could be like where like Starkers and I have talked about this a few times, and
I
with a
mean,
few other,
maybe you can
even
do
with
it through the
Eco.
reward system, right? I mean, the reward system itself maybe could do it because it's clearly different, right? It doesn't have any of the shape of it doesn't even have anything even approaching the shape of a fund. So I think you would eliminate all the if you were able to do it through the reward system, you would pretty much escape all the regulatory concerns at that point.
Yeah,
So,
so
and
I
there's
mean,
more money there again. There is more money there.
exactly. I mean, because the idea is to have this like Hive hub. I mean, and I know that they sort of exist in Venezuela, and they sort of exist maybe in Nigeria. There's a few of these places that are popping up that are, you could maybe call them like hubs. But in a way, I'm thinking it's like this idea is thinking about a place where there would be like kind of real tourist money moving around, and real mechanisms to sort of use Hive and have Hive and demonstrate, like sort of like a physical demonstration location.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was it. Yeah,
So it's
go ahead.
easier to jumpstart something like that in places with weaker economies, right? Because just the amount of money involved is so much lower, and the incentives, therefore, the monetary incentives are higher for people to participate because it doesn't take as much money to be fun, be attractive. But yeah, I think you certainly can do that. And there's been some proposals to do that. I mean, I sort of felt like there was a similar idea to do something like that in Poland too, right? And there's a kind of place operating there now.
Kroller'sville.
Yeah. So I think these things can be done and can succeed. To make them, if you want to make them actually profitable, is like starting any profitable business is challenging, but is certainly doable. There's going to be there's going to be failures as well as successes when you try something like this, but that's just normal. So yeah, I think it's open idea. Using the DHF to do it, I think is problematic, but like I said, I think the alternate reward system, the primary reward system, is probably a valid way to do it and could work. You could literally fund stuff just through posts about a place.
So it's like in delegations. Is this what you mean with alternative? Like,
Well, doesn't have to be delegations. You could just get straight votes. You could just get people to. You can be regularly making posts about what you're doing, and you can have people regularly voting for those based on not only the content, but because they're trying to fund the underlying activity that's being supported by the posts.
Yeah, I'll say, Booklands, if you end up doing something towards this, you definitely have my support, and I'll do what I can to get Dan's support, and probably even a delegation. Like if you're creating Hive hubs and doing workshops in Hive in your local area, I'm going to vote for all of your posts. That's for sure.
And this can be a substantial amount of money, I should add. I mean, you get a couple, we get enough big stake voters voting up a post. That's, especially you can make them daily. That can be a lot of money.
There's an example of this in Nigeria already. Only 4 months ago, there was no HBD economy in Nigeria. And now it's the biggest economy on Hive in terms of physical spending. It's about 3 times bigger than Venezuela at this point. And that one of the guys that started it, Focus Now, user at Focus Now, shout out to him. He kind of picked it up and ran with it and got Hive all over the place over in Nigeria. Is really one of the drivers behind it. But in the last 2 weeks, he's opened his own supermarket from the rewards that he's got from people voting for him for doing Spend HBD content. And he's gone out and bought a load of supermarket stock. So like, pasta, food, vegetables, whatever, right? And he's opened his own supermarket, and it's a Hive only, accepts Hive and HBD. And of course, as a result, he can give his clients discounts so he can outcompete his local competition. And he runs workshops from there, and all of that content's getting voted. So it's just a fantastic story. And I'm not saying that's the way you have to do it exactly, Brian, but there is an example there of something like that working.
Yeah, and to my my guess is that right now it'd be easier to do that in a place that's struggling economically than one that's, say
It's obviously
Germany.
easier. I think it took him like $3,000 of his rewards over the last few months to get that set up and running.
Yeah.
It's probably a lot easier to do there than in other places, but the models.
Yeah, but I mean, you start you prove the model out and you do it a couple places, and we can move up, right? You can start to move up to bigger expenditures.
And one of the other things that I want to be open about here is that if we can see a business is making money on Hive, Dan and I will loan you money, if you need it, if you want it, especially if we can see there's revenue coming through the business. And we've said we'll do the first few at least at 0% APR, so we'll forfeit the 15% APR to pump HBD into the economy and get it into businesses that we can see are actually active and actually earning in HBD already. So that's that whole side of Hive starting to grow that just wasn't there before. And I think that's very, very exciting because the collateral of the business really is, hey, look, here's my revenue. And if we can see that on the chain and we can see that there's a genuine cash flow into the business, then there's a case to make to give that business a loan to let it expand further.
Nice.
Well,
And just kind of flipping this, and I see this question from Mino because we were talking a little bit. So this comes back to like something that really affected my start. I received a delegation. I won like some dumb art contest in one of my kind of early months, and just this little taste of being able to just reward people a little bit better. I feel like it was one of the things that caught me and made me stick around. And basically, Mino and I were just getting into this conversation about how it just feels like delegations aren't used effectively anymore. And then the discussion was like, well, why couldn't the DHF offer like small delegations for proposal instead of like a full elaborate proposal? Why couldn't it just be a delegation for somebody that's, I don't know, running a meetup or something like this? Because there's no real specific loss to the system in that. I guess there still is maybe a little bit, but yeah, this is the point. My question is like, why do you think we're not using delegations quite in the same way as it seemed like it used to be?
I'm not sure who the question was specifically addressed to, but so first, tackling the DHF side of it, of course, you would need some software to do that, right? There's no way the DHF, at least in its base form, you can vote a delegation to someone. So non-trivial, I would say, to make a change to the DHF. Now you could do something intermediate, like somebody could say, well, I'm going to run this proposal, get HBD, use it to buy Hive, and then stake that Hive, and then proposals. So I'll be like a distributor of delegations based on it, but you'd have to take a trusted party to do that.
Is it okay if I jump in for a second, Blocktrades? Because I want to explain it a little better. I think okay. I'm sorry about coins. I think you did good, but I feel like okay. So here's what I'm thinking, and I know that I'm gonna I don't know, jump into a touchy subject, whatnot. And I'm not saying this was the best way that they did it, because obviously we all have our critiques of the Steemit times and Neds and what have you. But if you guys remember back in the day, and of course there was a lot of mess ups too. A thing that would happen, there would be a group of people that were, coming up with an idea. They would open source it, of course. That's one of the conditions, I think. And then I don't know if it happened in Slack. I'm sure the Blocktrades could tell us if that was the case, if he feels comfortable doing so. But there must have been a conversation happening with the, let's call them the big hitters, and then they would say, "Hey, look at these dudes over here building something nice."
So to answer quickly, no.
Okay.
There were no such conversations. It was all
no such conversation. But then Steemit would all of a sudden delegate a big chunk. It happened, for example, with DTube, and then all of a sudden DTube, had a way to more or less fund their initiative. Now, I know that's not bulletproof, but here's the thing I like about it. One of the concerns that a lot of people have, including myself, regarding the way the DHF works, is that it's more like a grant. Meaning, once you give them the HBDs, they can literally sit on their hands and do absolutely nothing. And hopefully, they're smarter than that. Hopefully, they'll be able to somehow, some way appease people, do updates, show you, hey, this is what I'm working on. Hey, check this out. You know, I don't program anymore, but I can look at a GitHub and I can see a pull request and I see, okay, this guy had changed 3 lines here, 4 lines here. I can kind of keep them accountable, but some people have no idea what they're doing. So, if you do it through a delegation system, and the way that I was imagining it, if it was somehow democratic, people like me, people like anybody, because we're like, hey, you know what? This person has. I'm gonna come up with the just to be silly. Let's say that Addicted comes up with a new project, and he calls it the I don't know, the rug pool. Okay, just to be, I guess, consistent with my stupidity. And he's like, this idea that he's got going on, and he has to keep on posting updates, curating people participating of his project. Because, and if we don't see activity, which is literally what we want to see, you know, more engagement on the blockchain, more people using it, then people can unvote it in the same way that we unvote or vote for a proposal. And then his delegation after a certain threshold just goes away because it's not meeting, I guess, our collective criteria of what he should be doing.
So let
Is
me
there
describe
more
the
risk there? Of
mechanism
course.
first, and then what I think you're proposing. Your proposal would be something like we have some mechanism, let's just leave aside where it comes from right now, where you could give somebody a delegation of HP. And then they're going to be running some project, and in order to profit from it and make use of this delegation, they're going to be getting money from the delegation, and that would be potentially from 2 sources from the delegation, I suppose. One would be they simply get money for curating whenever they vote for anything, and 2 would be when they vote for their own posts, they'd be getting money for they'd be getting author awards from their own posts they voted. So one thing you could see here is this system would encourage people to make posts about their project because they make money when they're able to vote those posts up, and so they make money by making posts. Now, of course, a project could do the same thing just by having somebody vote for that project directly rather than give them a delegation, right? So if Dan gives, for instance, they call me Dan gives you a 2 million delegation, or he just votes up your post with 2 million at 100%, you get the same amount of money either way. So the part for your own posts can be done without a delegation. It literally can be just done by you making posts. And that's the one I think that's more interesting there, because there you're getting people to vote up. You're encouraging people to make posts about the project, which I think is one of your concerns here. Is you feel there's not enough reporting about a lot of projects, so you have better information about what they're doing. Now, on the other side, they can also just vote up other people's posts. And this gets more interesting because I think more potentially problematic, because exactly whose other posts are they voting up and why? And does it have anything to do with their project? Are they using it as some kind of incentive to attract people to their project? Are they just voting up people who write about their project, basically some form of marketing? Or are they just randomly voting up their friends? You know, it's a more murky area, I think, from that point of view. So
yeah, what you point out is correct. This is not without. I can come up with, you can come up with a way to abuse any system, but the way that I see it is that
no,
it
I'm
gives
not
us
trying
also,
to. I'm just saying that these are the impacts, right? I'm not saying.
yeah.
I'm just describing what I see as the things that will, good
Correct.
and bad that'll happen.
But I also feel like it can work as a starting point for because let's say, I don't know, like most of the people that are here have been here for a long time. You know, I'm almost here 8 years, but I don't think there's anybody here who's new. But let's say let's talk about another thing that we want, which is more developers, more people that can program and do, that can do a lot of the heavy lifting. We want them. Well, but they have to. They also have to prove themselves to us because we're such a hermetic. I don't know if we would call us a community because there's some divisions here, but we're a hermetic place. You know, when people come in, we look at him and was like, what is this guy? What is he doing? And somebody who with great potential. And I say this with as much love as I have for HIVE, because I have I wouldn't be here otherwise, that person finds a hostile environment, and we're getting a proposal passed, if he has a great idea, is close to impossible. But maybe that person can start building something, and maybe that person can get a little bit of in this system, hypothetical system that, I still haven't worked out everything in my head, can get a little bit of delegation to get his idea more or less running. Do let me call it delegation proposal. That's not what it is, but just for the sake of expedience.
You mean like they can get? You can ask for a small proposal to do a proof of concept, right?
Correct, but in that delegation, that way we can kind of see what they're doing, and then the people, and who is the police? Who are the auditors? Let's call it that. Like you are, just like the decision you make about trades. By the way, which I am grateful that you were very frontal about your position. I think that's great because what we need is to be grown men and say what we feel, and it's not personal. And I think that's great. I was kind of worried it wasn't going to happen, but all of us have that responsibility because all of us have whatever investment we have on this blockchain, we have it. So all of us police it. If somebody starts abusing, it's up to all of us to be like, hey, this is not right, and speak up. So if we all get involved also in this, let me call it this little tiny delegations, try to, I don't know what you would call it. It's almost like throwing fertilizer out there. Hey, dude, come here. Look, check this out. You can do something here.
Let me just understand though. I mean, so where's the source of the delegations in this case coming from? Are you talking about individuals providing a delegation to someone? I'm trying to. What's the mechanism for they receive the delegation?
This is precisely why what I'm saying. I know it's not simple, but I imagine a system where we have two ways of funding, if you will, projects. One would be what we have, DHF, which is grants. I call them grants. That's what they are, grants. And then we have the other way, which is the way the Steemit used to do it. I'm sorry, I know that hurts in the gut, and which is through delegations. But now those delegations don't have to be gigantic. It doesn't have to be, here's $2 million. So I imagine the money that we have in the ecosystem that is all locked up in the DHF right now, a portion of it. Don't know what the percentage would be. I would be delighted if we can sit down and brainstorm some numbers here. Would be allocated for the creation, or let's call it a DHF delegator, decentralized delegator. Let's call it that. And then we vote on other proposals that are not for money, they're not for grants, they're for delegations. And it can be as tiny as somebody saying, "Hey, I'm an onboarding in the city of Calcutta. I don't know. I'm coming out with some BS right now, and I have this thing that I'm doing this meetings, and I want 5,000." HP delegation, this is what I've done, shows pictures, shows everything, and then we vote on it. It's like, I like it or not. Reaches a certain threshold, he gets it. Doesn't reach it, doesn't get it.
Okay, so you're talking about specifically, so the mechanism you're proposing, just to reiterate then, is somebody can propose a certain amount of delegation power to an account, and people would vote on that exactly the same as they would vote on getting HBD, right?
Correct.
Is that correct?
And of course, and we have to come up with, because I know I can come up with ways to abuse it now, and I'm sure you're doing it as well, Dan. But we have to brainstorm. What would be the way to abuse it, and then come up with patches? Okay, no, this is okay. We can't have that. We can't have that. So there has to be, in my opinion, it has to be an upvote and a downvote on these things, so that we don't. But it's not necessarily risk free again, but I think the risk is smaller. And because I suspect I'm not alone. I don't feel that great giving out grants. I really don't. And I'm not going to sit and
it's characterizing them. I get what you're saying, but if you look at the mechanism closely, it's maybe not as straightforward as it might seem. So when you give out a delegation, you are actually giving out money for sure. And right, so if somebody has this delegation and they're voting with it, they're getting money from it daily. Just like proposals work daily. In the end, they're both kind of the same. They both give money out to the person who gets the delegation, assuming they use it. Now, of course, they could just sit on the delegation and not use it. But I think we have to make the assumption that the only point to receive one of these delegations you plan on using, you plan on using it heavily, right? Because so at the end of the day, that person has to get presumably the same amount of money to do the same things, whether it's through a delegation or whether it's through HBD. And the money comes from kind of the same place to some extent in the end too.
From inflation.
It's coming from the stakeholders, right? It's gonna. So there is a little bit difference in terms of who pays. So if you look at a delegation, the people who pay the most for delegations when delegations are given are going to be the other people who powered up their hive. They suffer the worst because there's a fixed supply that's going to those voters. Whereas the DHF is more generalized. The impact is felt through all stakeholders, whether they've powered up their hive or not powered up their hive. But in terms of the amount of money that would have to be delivered, it's going to be the same. There's a shutoff valve, just like you're talking about as a grant, but there's a shutoff valve for both systems. You can shut off a proposal by unvoting it. You can shut off the delegation by unvoting it. So in both cases, you've kind of got the same mechanism in. You could stop the money if voters want to stop the money. It's just it just looks slightly different, but honestly, I don't feel economically it's going to, other than the set of stakeholders who are bearing the brunt of it, it changes profile slightly when I think about it. Other than that, I'm not sure at the end of the day it's going to be a lot different.
I guess I'm subscribing to this idea. I don't. Somebody can help me here because I can't remember what it was. But there's this idea that in a network, the network increases in value as more and more people use it, as more engagement the network has. So the more usage. So it's supposed to be, obviously. I'm not saying it's a linear.
Well, generally,
thing.
it's more than the usage. The normal spec is the number of users. That's the primary thing. And the reason is, you can see it on it goes back to what I was talking about on Facebook. The reason a lot of people are on Facebook are simply because their friends are there.
That's correct. But the way
so it's the number of users more than the transactions. That's the key thing. It can matter how many transactions too, because there's interaction as a measurement as well. But the key one is actually the number of people.
Okay, I don't disagree with that at all. But I guess my point where I'm coming to this is that a lot of the things that are being funded by a DHF seem to be focused on the back end, which is great because we need it, but it's not so much focused on initiatives that bring more people to here. You see what I mean? Because I think VSC and all.
So
we're
talking about like marketing efforts, right? You're saying marketing efforts, I guess. Is that what is that fair?
Yeah, maybe that's part of it. But you know what's also part of it? Somebody from, I don't know, like let's say Buttcoins wants to start an initiative to bring musicians to HIVE.
Like that exists or something already. Like that. Yeah.
So that is a community builder. Community builders don't have a project they're going to put on DHF and be like, but
yeah. So I mean, I guess okay. Let me cut you short here. So yeah. So obviously that happens today, right? Communities do get either direct delegations sometimes, or they get votes, which again amounts to almost pretty much the same thing. And in fact, Lord Butterfly, he has my vote. That's I kind of do that. That's how I sort of fund it to some extent. I'm not the only one, but he did approach me early on about it. And yeah, so you're saying that you're proposing that as another mechanism we could have it through a voted pool of stake that could be used. I guess I'm trying to figure out what's really different between the proposal, because like I said, the same amount of money kind of has to be delivered. You're going to have similar voting mechanisms on it, so I'm kind of trying to look at what is different about it. Now,
it could be a perception difference. Snook wants to say something. I want to make sure I'm not a jerk and let her speak.
Okay,
I guess she's
one more thing I'll say that I think is a sort of driving difference that strikes me as different is that one encourages posting more than the other. That seems to be, to my mind, that's probably the biggest effective difference. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
With the delegation, you got to have posts in order to get the payment. With the HBD, with the DHF HBD proposals, you don't. It helps because it keeps you funded if you post more often, but it's not like driving you to write posts routinely.
Yeah, that's correct. Snook, go ahead, Snook. I realized I wasn't letting you speak. You were going to say something.
Oh, that's all right. I just go back to when I started, we got a 25 delegation. And so that you didn't have to worry about, well, we didn't have RCs back then, but whatever. You didn't have to worry about, you could write a post, you could answer comments under your post, and the next day write another post. Where now, when somebody starts, you can't do that. Now, I understand they got rid of it because people were opening accounts, taking the money out, and then opening up another account, taking the money out. So, but is there a way you could go back to doing that? Because there's whole communities that look out for new people that are posting, but it happens that a lot of people do slip through that. And if you make a brand new account, you literally can write a post. You can't, if you find a mistake in your post, you can't fix it.
Right, because you don't have RCs. So, yeah. So, I mean, basically, you could have, and you can easily have a system, and some of the onboarding systems do this, in fact, which is that when they create the account, they give it some extra delegated RC temporarily, and that exists as technology already. But in terms of building a community like this, I mean, I think a very feasible system is you could actually just have a bunch of people pull together that they're gonna donate some HP for delegation purposes. You could get some stakeholders who have some amount of HP and say, look, we want to form a new community and we'll delegate to new people who join that community and are posting that community. We'll upvote them. In other words, you could just set up an encouragement system. This doesn't have to be through code again. This can just be an initiative somebody starts and markets, and advocates for. And that's what Vibes is. It's, and we had other ones before Vibes too, right? There's plenty of ones exist now.
I'm more talking about just somebody that reads about it on wherever, YouTube or
so just a new person coming in, yeah, and
correct.
Yeah.
They're
so
not going to know.
That's kind of an onboarding problem. That's actually an onboarding issue. So
right.
what you'd be arguing for there is that the onboarding system would initially assign some extra
Correct.
delegated. And again, I think probably some of them do this now. I don't follow them that closely. I don't know if there's any that does or not. Somebody can probably speak up who's tracked the existing onboarding system, but there's absolutely nothing that prevents that from happening. And I actually thought that maybe eSency or one of the other ones already did that. I think eSency does it, as I recall. They give extra. I think they give an extra. I can't remember how much HP value it was. I think it was 23 or something like that. Enough to have all the posts you want for sure as a normal user. And then eventually they take it away. But the idea is by the time they take it away, you should have been participating and got some level of rewards.
Right.
But again, even that, it can be abused. And because their onboarding system basically gets free accounts, it is abused, I would say, to some extent.
Absolutely. I mean, when I look at new people and I'll delegate 25 or 50 or 100 to them so that they can do that. But by the time you find them, it's been...
Yeah, it would make more sense to do it at the onboarding stage. So
correct.
the account system itself, I think that's the way the one I had worked at Blocktrades, when you bought an account, you could pay a little bit more, and it would basically give you, and it wasn't, in this case, it wasn't a delegation, but it actually gave you extra powered up so that you were, in fact, by default, I made you pay like twice as much as the actual account cost. And that gave you all the voting, all the power you needed to do whatever you would want to do as a normal user. As long as you weren't a bot, you could do everything. So, and I think onboarding systems probably should be encouraged to do that in general. Not take the actual even if they charge, don't pay the actual minimum, but just charge an extra $1 and give them enough to do what they, to do stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, running into new people that want to stay.
Yeah, you don't want them to be frustrated by that kind of annoyance of not posting or editing your post. I 100% agree with you on that point.
Yeah, and that's what I find about having people here and staying and wanting to be involved. They really can't. And you either catch people in the first to build Hive and projects. That's where you catch them, is in the first couple of weeks.
Yep. So I think you've essentially identified a existing problem with a bunch of several onboarding sign-up platforms that they don't do that. I think they should.
That was it. That was all I.
It's a good point, and it's another issue for the onboarding guys who are making onboarding software to consider. We are actually building an onboarding system, I think, into the new version of basically the Denser, the replacement for Denser. I think there's been some discussion of building an onboarding into that. I need to actually follow what's going on there, but at this point we'll have to consider too. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Blocktrades, what's your thoughts on directing some of the newly minted tokens to rewarding content based on statistics, say view stats or interaction stats of that content?
Yeah, to the extent that it's not gamed, I think it's great.
Yeah. Is that something that you would be a proponent of building into the layer 1? Or is that something that we should do a layer 2 for, do you think? It
would be super difficult to do at layer 1, I think. I mean, it depends on exactly what you want to do. I mean, you could do it. It's to me, it feels like it should be done at layer 2. just to keep most things I don't need. There's few things that really need to be done at layer 1, in my opinion. So I would say probably layer 2. The thing to do it in layer 1 would be problematic because you're basically probably what you need to do is access external data, and then that becomes a problem if that external data is not available at some point.
Yeah. Would it be something where you would get, for example, maybe the DAOs, and this is a more general question on DAOs as well in your view, but to get the DAO to fund a multi-sig pool that produces an APR, and then that APR could be distributed to content for bringing views in, or content for interactions, or...
Yeah, I mean, there's any number of ways to do it. I mean, how you want to manage the voting, but or whatever amount you're going to give is totally up in the air, right? There's lots of different schemes I could come up with. I mean, I'm thinking of something like you would have something that'd be scanning, various other social media platforms, for instance, see people, and I think Posh had this idea, right? You can look for engagement on other platforms and basically reward based on it. So I think the idea, at least, theories is an interesting idea, and it's worth looking at. I still think at the end of the day, the best way I think advertising is important, but I think attractive power is the most important thing. Advertising is great, and certainly you need it, but the magic, the silver bullet, so to speak, is getting something that just drives people to want to come there and stay there. Something that you don't need so much advertising just because it's so good you want to join.
Sure. Well, I think something like, if word got out that you could post to Hive, and based on the amount of views that you get on Hive, especially with content creators who already have audiences that could drive traffic to that.
Yeah, it's obviously a great potential sort of, again, it's sort of near like a guerrilla marketing mechanism.
Sure.
Because it's free for those people in some sense to put that out there on their site to push, their channel or whatever, to push Hive. It doesn't really cost them anything. So if they get rewarded for it, they're likely to do it.
Exactly. I mean, it's interesting because the question is like, do you do it based on the views on internal?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions on how you do it, right? I mean, that's the and there's the problems. There can be, if you're not careful, somebody's just going to game you.
Sure. Like at the moment, there's the proof that the Posh is a great initiative, is one. They're doing a lot of great work on external platforms, sharing content from Hive onto external platforms. And there's also Hive Echo as well, where there's a drive with loads of shorts. So the content's already made for you, and you just go share those shorts. And that's why long form content like this is really important, that we have these discussions on a regular basis, because people can...
Yeah, I mean, people got to know about it here too. I think you dropped out, but I think at least what I was extracting possibly from it is people have to be aware of these initiatives in order to participate. So we also have internal marketing that we have to do just to get, if we're going to do guerrilla marketing, it requires a certain amount of internal marketing to get all those guerrillas in action.
All of this is coming right at the edge of something that but all these conversations are coming close to this thing that I've talked about a few times, which is like, what about a type of mentor program of people that were already known? Because I kind of agree with your previous statement that really advertising is fine, but real spread comes through people who are bringing in people that are excited, they're already in, and bring in other people. And over the years, I've onboarded tons and tons of people. But one piece of the puzzle is that like just a short period of time where those people, because they got onboarded by a known person, could get this delegation for a little while, so that they could build up their own rep, and they can be known and supported by other people, just get them in the door and seeing the possibility of what Hive has to offer. Some people
Yeah.
complain about this because they say you're incentivizing through money, but I just think it's a mechanism to show the power of what Hive is potential of. But
Yeah, well, Hive incentivizes through money. It's hard to dispute this point. It's kind of built into the system at a very base layer. The guy who did it was an extreme capitalist, at least at that point in time. So yeah, I think you could do it. And honestly, I think if you want to do something like a startup initiative like that, you could do it right now. You could probably go up to any number of the stakeholders if you're well known in the community already and you're well aware of the system and you say, this is what I want to do, and you tell the stakeholder, I need this much delegation. I want you to be able in this case, you wouldn't want them to delegate to you. Potentially, you'd want them to delegate to someone else. And you're like, look, can I give you accounts that you'll delegate to? And I suspect you could get somebody to take that deal. I don't doubt there's plenty of stakeholders with lots of stake. Because honestly, as a big stakeholder, you're often you don't. It's not that easy what to do with your stake, anyways. When you get a lot, it becomes problematic at some point. So it's not that other such stakeholders are always unwilling to provide such service. I think you could probably talk to some of the big stakeholders. I'm sure you could find someone that would help you with something like that. I'm probably not the best because I do want to track the things that I delegate to, and I prefer not to spend a lot of my time tracking stuff right now. I've just got too much, but I think you can find people who have more spare time that might be interested in that kind of deal.
This is Aloha Ed. Can I circle back to something that Blocktrades touched on earlier? Is there time?
Well, I think we got all the time in the world. So,
all right. So one of the comments that you made, and it's kind of been percolating through my brain in the interim. You said, I have all the money I need, or all the money I foreseeably need. What I don't have is time. But you also mentioned you don't have kids. So in a sense, a Hive is the legacy that you can leave behind. It's something permanent. So where do you want Hive to be a decade from now, 2 decades from now? What does leaving your mark on the world through Hive or leaving some legacy through Hive, what does it look like to you? What would be a successful outcome for that?
Well, in fairness, I have 2 legacies. So Hive is one, the other project is the other. And honestly, in terms of impact, I have more ambition in terms of what I want to do with the other one, even than Hive. So my ambitions are extreme, I would say. I want to change the world. I want to make it more like I think it should be. And that requires a lot of change. Hive can help in that process because I can see ways that Hive can be integrated to that work. And so early on, I could see connections between Hive and that. But my main goal with my time is to try to make a more fair system, a more free system for the world, a better way for us to collaborate, because I think we have to work together. If you throw somebody out on a desert, they can't do much on their own. It's just hard. I mean, you could throw them in anywhere. They can be in with all the food in the world. They still can't get much done without other people. So you need collaboration. I think this is fundamental. But the systems that we have for collaborating right now are very bad, in my opinion. Even the best of the systems are terrible. I think representative democracy is pretty much idiocy, but it seems like the best system we got at the moment. But I think it's terrible. I mean that in a literal sense. If I had to come up with a system for how to make decisions, I just can't imagine how poor representative democracy is at making decisions. So we need a new system, I think, for working together that makes more sense, that achieves more, eliminates a lot of the problems we have: wars, wasteful wars, unfair distribution of labor. We want a system with more meritocracy, where people are actually rewarded for what they're doing and not for scamming people. A system where we can have more trust in people, so that we can work together and not have to spend so much wasteful time on checking each other's what we're doing in some kind of painful and stupid way. All that's the thing that I want to change. It's a lot of things, and it's not a simple problem, as you might imagine.
those are ambitious goals, and those sound like time-intensive goals. One of the things that happened when you voted for the return proposal and kind of reset the game is a lot of these discussions started up. And so you had people coming together and trying to understand what they perceived as a problem. We had some good conversations, I think, and there's different mechanisms through which consensus is built on Hive. The mechanisms you see now, right? The way we talk to each other on Hive, is that improving? Now, just for a bit of context, I was not here for the fork and not here for a lot of the wars. But looking at the way that Hive comes together now to solve problems and to kind of find some consensus, I suppose it's not exactly democratic, but how do you see that, and how do you see the inter-Hive or the communication within Hive as it exists today?
So yeah, just to, I guess, sort of address some of the direct and indirect points. So I think there's definitely been improvement over time. If you look back at how things were done back in the Steemit days, it was pretty terrible, in my opinion. And there's been a distinct improvement in Hive. It's much better. There are more voices that could have influence, and it's, you know, essentially Steemit was close to pretty much a centralized system for the most part, and it became obvious eventually. But nonetheless, I don't view Hive's mechanism as, it's still far from ideal, in my opinion. This, like I said, the system I'm trying to build is basically what you're talking about. I'm trying to solve those problems that still exist in a system like Hive. But I think as Hive goes, it's not bad. I think it's better than a lot of systems. Most, I would say, that I've seen. It doesn't. It has, like, if I die tomorrow, I think Hive will continue just fine, and that's good. There's a lot of systems where one guy goes away and the system falls apart. So, but there's a lot more that can be done in terms of how we voting and all those kind of things. We have essentially, it's a capitalist system. It's a traditional capitalist system. It's the way the system's set up right now. And yeah, I even think traditional capitalist systems have some problems. Something you never want to say when you're in a cryptocurrency.
Well, no good deed goes unpunished. Well, thank you for sharing that, and sorry for the big brain questions, but I appreciate your perspective on that.
Blocktrades, do you have any ideals or proposals for how to limit the size of your vote in the DAO? In terms of, I'm assuming you didn't really want to defund all the
honestly,
projects.
I don't mind my vote being this powerful.
Okay, what's the reason for that?
Because most of so my point of view, I mean, there's two things you might want in a system for voting, right? You want fairness, and you also want effectiveness, right? And so I'm mostly concerned at this point more about effectiveness than fairness, because I don't think we're going to come to a very fair system very easily in Hive that's going to be able to distribute things easily. I think that's just a really tough problem. And so effectiveness tends to be my biggest concern. And a lot of people are not really very experienced at how to estimate software projects, manage them, what should be voted for or not. And so I think, fortunately, a lot of the bigger stakeholders they have more knowledge about software, partly because a lot of the stake was gained through, people who were software people. And so that's actually, I think, to the good for us. The stakeholders that we have a better understanding of software development than the average Hive user. And so that means they're better at voting. I know it sounds terrible, right? But I think it's true. So I think I have probably had the most experience of anybody here at measuring how software projects work, just because I've been working in software for 30 some years and running a bunch of software projects. So I feel my vote, when I bother to cast it, I'm going to do it because I think it's really important. And so it doesn't bother me personally that my vote is strong at that point. I also, at the same hand, do want people to feel that they have a say in things, and they absolutely do. My vote can completely be overridden. It just takes a concerted effort on the part of other voters.
Do you feel like, I know I appreciate that this probably can also be worked around, but do you feel like things like having a sliding scale on people's votes on the DAO, so you could maybe defund 1 or 2 projects, but not the whole lot in certain cases?
Or you mean are you talking about me changing it so that I had more control over my voting, right?
Yes.
We could do that. But honestly, I think we can do this through good old politicking, horse trading. So say I have to vote up to, in order to unvote something, I have to unvote a bunch of stuff. I think I can just talk to other stakeholders at that point, and we can come to some agreement. We can compromise, right? We can say, okay, they'll drop some votes on this, or I'll accept this because a lot of times, what I think a lot of times it comes up when something gets unfunded is it also brings up a discussion where the people running that proposal will be open to negotiation on changing their proposal to make it more amenable to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So, the stakeholder will say, okay, I'm willing to take less money, or okay, I'm willing to make a change in how this proposal works. So I think having proposals get unfunded for a little bit is often healthy, just because it allows for a negotiation period. And that kind of negotiation also gets harder the more people are involved. So if we had a democracy stake voting system, for instance, you say we could even do it technically, the voters would lose a lot of ability to negotiate with the proposal holder at that point, because there wouldn't be so much clarity on, this is going to get voted if this is done, and it's not going to get voted if this isn't done.
Sure. It's interesting.
So again, I don't think DHF is perfect by any means, but I think it's not bad. I think it it's up to us to make it as effective as possible, but I think the mechanisms are there for a reasonable outcomes.
Hey, Dan, can I just say something? How difficult would it be to implement a downvote on proposals? Because that seems to make sense to me.
It could be done. How much work it'd be? You're asking, what do you want to know? How many hours it would take?
Yeah, like if it's something that cost effective, or it's just like, oh, it's really not going to fix much.
I don't think it would fix much, to be honest. I think that the same effect can be had through negotiations of the type I'm talking about between stakeholders. So I think the problem is already solvable simply by conversations, and maybe the conversations are better because the conversations force, someone who's talking about having two sides to discussion. That's a topic that's come up in the other work I'm working on too. But the idea that there's a analysis of the pros and cons that comes up when you have these negotiations between stakeholders and the proposers, that happens. I think that's beneficial. And if we just had, if I could simply just downvote the one proposal and that's it, I don't even have to talk to anybody about this. It gives me more power, and at the same time, it discourages conversations about the topic.
I didn't think about it that way, and you're absolutely right. But if that was the case, and Eco's going to love what I'm about to say, then having what we're doing today is an absolute necessity, because I don't think I'm alone here when I say that that it kind of sucks to being kept in the dark and of a lot of things. So
yeah, it's nice to be informed of what's going on. I give you that, and I could have come out and said exactly why I was doing what I was doing at the time. I didn't plan on making that vote, to be honest. Things happened too fast, and I was kind of forced into it faster than I was hoping to resolve the issue through other means. But the votes kept piling up really quickly, and so I was like, okay, I'm just going to downvote it for now. I mean, I'm going to upvote the proposal, and I knew things would work out pretty quickly, and they did. Right? How long was that vote even in effect for? So there's the other side of the software issue too, as you might understand, is not only is there, it might not be that hard to implement, but it's often hard to see all the impacts, both actual bugs that can happen that you don't plan for. And believe me, these things really happen in software. And we're talking about, again, making a change to the core. So the bugs can be from minor to actually catastrophic when you make a change like that. And of course, there's also just the consequential effects that you might not have thought of. You don't know until you try them to find out. So not only just actual bugs, but maybe just some kind of social impact that you didn't expect.
Yeah,
I'm
of course,
generally
there's
against
a
making changes unless it's very, very clear that it's a positive net benefit in the protocol. Because the other thing is changes of the protocol are also one of the least democratic things we have to a large extent, because it is largely dictated by the software developers, just because you need to find a software developer to do it, and there's not a lot of experienced software developers that can make protocol changes.
Well, let me ask you a complicated question, because I'm more interested in your opinion, really, and I think other people might be as well. I am of the impression that the blockchains that do the best are the ones that bring basically two groups, right? You have the users and all this stuff, but possibly more importantly or more foundational is a lot of really good developers. If you had it your way, and if you could do something, okay, let's imagine that you become a dictator right now, but just as a thought experiment, I'm not advocating for it. What would you do to bring more developers to Hive?
Well, I mean, I'm doing, I think, one of the things that has the most, that's like, sometimes there's like things you need to do to make something happen, and there's foundational things that if you don't do them first, nothing else can happen. You sort of see like there's like a minimum barrier to success, right? And I think I'm working primarily at what I consider that minimal barrier to success, which is I think it needs to be easier to do development in Hive. So a lot of the work we're doing, along with the smart contract layer, is in fact trying to make it much easier to do development. So that's the thing I'm spending time on now. Now, I think short of that, we could attract a lot of devs and they might get more frustrated. So we should really focus first on just making it as simple as possible to do whatever the heck your idea is on Hive. And then, you open the doors to a lot more different levels of developers than you have right now too, right? And so you have a bigger market for potential developers when you make it easier to develop.
Do we have and I'm just I guess reacting to Addicted saying this because he thinks documentation is trash.
Actually, the documentation's bad right now. We need to improve it. I mean, it's there,
who's the
but
we?
it's.
I guess that's my question.
Well, I mean, it can be anybody, literally, because anybody who understands how the software code can write documentation for it. And there have been several people who've worked on the documentation, but it's not just the documentation. There's also this issue of making the underlying libraries and things easier to use, faster, all these kind of things, make them more attractive. So documentation is certainly part of it, but we had a documentation site that documents most of the API, for instance. I mean, it's not it's mostly accurate and you can use it and it works, but you got another thing you guys got to understand is that software development is radically changing at this moment. And anybody who's played with software recently has probably seen this, is that we're getting to a big sea change because of AI. Yeah. AI software development is going to radically change this market. So
yeah, I've actually just a few days ago I decided to play with Grok and it learned how to program on Hive, and I did like a little bot. It's nothing that I'm going to launch, but it blew my mind. I was like, whoa, wow, okay.
Yeah, you can literally take people who are not programmers and make them programmers now. It helps to be a programmer still, don't get me wrong, but we're rapidly moving to the point where people will eventually be able to write programs who have no formal training.
Yeah, so, if there's at any point in time a complete, I guess you could call it implementation of a tool of that sort for
we are certainly planning for exactly that kind of thing. So
and that's it. That is
first is building better documentation using AI. So we're going to be generating documentation that's using AI itself, and then we'll also be doing we're working to build interactive documentation. Basically AI, you can ask it to all that will be coming because it's just the way things are going in this space.
Maybe this was addressed already, and I'm sorry if I'm taking over again. It's not my intention, really. It's just that I'm passionate about this shit. 8 years in, you can't help it. Do we have, or is there anybody doing, or maybe Dan knows? I guess you could call it lobbying for Hive to get Hive into exchanges, to get it to be in in articles.
So
and
the guys running Value Plan are the primary people who do that. So that's Crimson Clad and GP, and then they work with various other people. So I don't mean it's just them. There's lots of people involved, but they're the two project managers for the group. Crimson Clad in particular deals with exchanges, and so you talk about not hearing about things. There's reasons in some things. A lot of the exchanges are very sensitive about these kind of discussions.
Because
sad
of
but true.
market manipulations. Yeah.
I don't even want to know, to be honest. But because they are very sensitive about it, the negotiations themselves can't be publicly revealed. Things like this, so you don't hear about it in much. But those kind of talks go on as often as we can, and I say we just being us in general. It's not so much me, as they can be done. So, and somebody else wants to help get involved. I'm sure they, and seems competent at the job. They could talk to Crimson. But I actually think, Crimson does a pretty damn good job. It's just not an easy job.
Well, I'm sure of it. Yeah, I know her very well. I'm sure. I just didn't know that's what she was doing. That's awesome. Again, it's information that's not easy to find, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that one's a special case, to be honest, because, I mean, it is an area where she's not going to be making posts about her negotiations with any particular exchange at any given time. They would be unhappy with that.
Of course, makes sense. I think Starkers was going to say something. I'll shut up again.
Yeah, and of course, please don't answer this if you don't think it's appropriate. But I'd be interested. I think a lot of other people would be. Do you have a break-even price of Hive as to what price Hive has to be before you make the money back that you spent on development work over the years?
No, I've never tried to even calculate that, to be honest.
Is it high?
If you want to know how much money I'm spending, I could give you that kind of estimate.
People would be interested to know, because at least if I think a lot of people don't have an appreciation even.
Well, let me do the calculation. I don't even keep that in my head at the moment, but hold on. 50 times. Actually, 180 times 12 right now. I'm spending at the current moment around 2.16 million. So just a little over 2 million per year on Hive.
Mm-hmm. And that's continuous over the past 6, 7, 8 years.
Probably, it's just been going up over time.
Uh-huh.
So I mean, this would be starting from, say, when Hive was launched. It wouldn't be before that.
Let's see how long it is before someone goes and does the post now to work out what your break-even price is.
Yeah, I have no idea what that would be. God, I mean, do that, you'd have to also figure out when I'd bought and when I'd sold and all those kind of things, right? Because I have bought and sold Hive at various times, to some extent. I suspect right now I'm probably not far behind. If I might even be ahead, I don't know. It's hard to say. It depends on where you measure it from, right? Do you measure it from how much steam I had to how much I had after the fork, or because that was profitable time? It's a complicated equation. I don't spend time on it thinking about it, to be honest.
You got to factor in the joy and love that you also.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not my point that I'm not doing this for that purpose, so I don't bother spending time on it, thinking about it.
And are there any projects that or any things or developments on Hive that you see at the moment that are particularly interesting to you, or that you're excited for the future for?
Tough question.
Career and vibes.
I mean, I see stuff and I think that's cool, or that's neat. But possibly I'm just super demanding. So if you're not talking about changing the world dramatically, you're only going to get so much of my interest. So I maybe that's a disappointing answer. I'm sorry, but I'm happy to see stuff done on Hive, and I think it's cool. But rarely do I think this one thing is going to change the world.
Well, I think certainly with Hive and the way that it's been set up and the way that it's been rolled out over the years, I personally don't see another chain that you can actually change the world from in a significant way. Certainly for like personal digital freedom, which is the way I kind of view it. Hive's required. If we don't have Hive, we're in a bad place, I think. So it's going to be a key part of all of that, I think.
Well, I'm certainly hopeful.
Just one more Blocktrades. I'd like to put in a pitch, I guess, to get you to come back on maybe with Eco and myself sometime in the near future, and maybe decouple the conversation from like the DHF stuff. And just as I've been listening to some of your philosophical and your ideological motivations for what you're trying to develop sound kind of compelling, and I'd like to dive into that deeper in the future if that's something you'd be amenable to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's sort of pre-marketing in some sense because, you know, we're building this stuff. But yeah, I don't mind talking about it ahead of time.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Does that tech involve Hive accounts, Blocktrades, this separate project that you're working
on? That's where the possible intersection is. So the system is basically it's a system where people can input information and get information out of, right? It's software. And one of the most natural inputs to me feels like could be basically transactional input from a blockchain. So it's not the only one by any means. It's not required in any way by the design, but there's an obvious linkage. And when I'm developing the software for that, I can see how HiveMind, for instance, which is a layer inside Hive that processes the transaction data works. I'm designing the software that it processes user transactions very similar to the way in that system, very similar to the way Hive transactions are processed by HiveMind and the other half applications. So I could see, I early on, I saw that it could be neat to have a blockchain accounts be a mechanism for representing identities in the system. This system does require identities of a sort, and those can be either pseudo-anonymous identities or fully KYC, fully no. KYC is the wrong term because it's not about customers, but about knowing who you're dealing with. So because real life identities type thing.
With things like the spending in Hive and the spend HBD and then the claiming of discounts on Hive that's going on, we obviously all this is done by a trusted group of people who say, yes, this is a real business, and they onboard the business and they put their Hive reputation behind the fact that they're telling the truth on that. However, what it means is that anyone that goes into a Hive listed business and spends money is a proof of person without having to provide any KYC. So I don't know if that type of system would be helpful, but yeah, Hive is becoming a proof of person system as well as just a content system.
Yeah, and when you talk about proof of person system, this system's kind of building on that too. So it's gonna have a lot more capabilities in terms of being able to identify. That's one of the fundamental things we want to be able to offer is an ability for when people desire to be able to prove their identity in a digital way.
Yeah, and this is one of the beauties of this project, of this type of software, because you don't need to provide your details, but you can prove that you're a real person in this way.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing that, other than the immutability aspect, the other interesting aspect of blockchain technology for this is the ability to control identity through cryptographic keys, right? That's another. And so Hive has a nice natural mapping between the cryptographic keys and an account identity. So I certainly think that there'll be a point that kind of integration will happen probably pretty early on between the two. But that part. So the other project is purely a well, it's not only open source, but it's donation funded too. So it's charity funded. So it can't do anything that's really for profit oriented. So it won't personally touch cryptocurrency, but I can see the other way around. We could have a cryptocurrency like Hive integrate to it.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting with Hive is if you've got proof of person accounts, and you can. I've seen Wavio, for example, experimenting with like reputations and expertise. So based on the amount of votes that you've got on a certain tag, you get an expertise ranking on that tag.
That concept, the two concepts you just mentioned, reputation and expertise, are really very deeply embedded in the system. They're actually sort of bedrock. Those and rating are sort of the bedrock concepts behind everything else.
That's cool. Well, at least then I guess you could start off with a bunch of people on the Hive blockchain that have clearly
Honestly,
developed.
that was completely my idea. I was like, when I had this idea quite a while ago, when I was like, what would be the ideal customer base? And I say this in a non-monetary sense, another user base. What would be the ideal user base? We want somebody that open to new ideas, that that willing to reject conventional thought processes, but still rational. That's a good starting base for this project. So that was always in the back of my mind when I was starting this, is that this would be a great thing to introduce to Hive people, because they're the kind of people that I think could really adopt this technology fast.
Sure. So you're going to have Buckerman be the expert and top authority on wrestling on the new system.
Sounds good.
If you can throw me through a table.
We'll need a lot of experts, that's for sure.
Yes.
Oh, trust me, brother, we can make it happen. We can get people put through tables. We can climb the ladder of success all the way to the top. I'm talking the cream of the crop.
Did Macho Man Randy Savage learn that from you?
Taught him everything he knows, brother.
Everything he knows. 100%.